On a quiet spring afternoon in 1985, Bedford County deputies walked into a scene so brutal, it would haunt them forever. Inside a peaceful Virginia home, a respected couple lay butchered, their throats slashed, their bodies left in pools of blood. At first, detectives suspected a cult killing. But as the investigation unraveled, the truth turned out to be far more chilling, because the monsters weren't strangers. They were hiding in plain sight, closer to the victims than anyone could have imagined. This is the story of the shocking double murder of Derek and Nancy Haysom, and how their own daughter Elizabeth Roxanne Haysom and her lover Jens Söring became prime suspects in one of the most infamous cases of manipulation, betrayal, and murder for love in modern history. April 3, 1985. A frantic call summons Bedford County Police to the home of Derek and Nancy Haysom. Inside, investigators find horror. Derek, 72, lies just beyond the front door, his throat savagely cut. Nancy, 53, is sprawled on the kitchen floor, surrounded by blood. Both had been stabbed multiple times, their final struggle marked by defensive wounds. The scene is so vicious, one detective later compared it to a slaughterhouse. But what puzzled police most was what was missing. There was no forced entry. No robbery. Only 3 chairs pulled from the dining table, but just 2 plates set. It suggested the Haysoms had invited their killer inside, shared dinner, before being murdered. At first, investigators suspected a ritual killing. Cult experts noted the blood patterns, the body's position northward, even unusual cuts. Panic spread through the community. Were Satanists prowling their quiet town? But 3 months passed, and no evidence tied any cult to the murders. Attention soon shifted closer to home. Elizabeth Haysom, the youngest daughter, was just 20 years old. Beautiful, worldly, articulate. She seemed far removed from small-town Virginia. When detectives questioned her, she claimed she'd spent that weekend in Washington, D.C. with her boyfriend, a German diplomat's son named Jens Söring. But whispers began to grow. Elizabeth had a troubled past. Drug use, runaway episodes, even Interpol once called to bring her home. Her relationship with her parents was rocky, and Derek had openly disapproved of her new boyfriend. Could resentment have turned deadly? Elizabeth's personality soon came into focus. Diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, she was described as brilliant, manipulative, and dangerously impulsive. Investigators believed she used her intellect and sexuality to control Jens, who was naive, awkward, and hopelessly in love with her. Letters between them revealed Elizabeth's growing hatred for her parents. She painted them as abusive tyrants, and Jens, desperate for her affection, learned to hate them too. Detectives began to wonder, was Jens so deeply under her spell that he'd kill for her? Investigators checked the couple's story. The rental car Elizabeth and Jens used had 429 unexplained extra miles, almost exactly the round-trip distance from Washington, D.C. to the Haysoms' home. When confronted, Elizabeth claimed they'd simply gotten lost for hours in the city. Detectives weren't buying it. Elizabeth gave blood and footprints willingly, and results cleared her from the bloody print at the crime scene. But Jens refused. He grew arrogant in interviews, scoffing at accusations. Still, without hard evidence, police couldn't move forward. And then the suspects vanished. Elizabeth and Jens fled the U.S., traveling across Europe and Asia using fake IDs and fraud schemes. Eventually, they returned to London, where British police caught them in 1986 while investigating a check scam. In their apartment, detectives discovered fake identities, stolen goods, and, most damning, diaries and letters filled with fantasies about Elizabeth's parents being dead. 7 months after their disappearance, Virginia investigators got the call. Their suspects were in custody. In London, Jens finally cracked. He confessed to killing Derek and Nancy, claiming he did it to protect Elizabeth and win her love. Elizabeth, meanwhile, denied involvement, though her letters suggested otherwise. But once arrested, their twisted bond shattered. Elizabeth testified that Jens carried out the murders while she waited in Washington. Jens claimed the opposite, that Elizabeth arranged everything, even using drug friends to commit the killings. The lovers turned on each other. Elizabeth returned to Virginia in 1987 and struck a deal. She pled guilty to being an accessory before the fact and was sentenced to 90 years in prison. Jens, extradited 3 years later, faced trial in 1990. Forensic evidence sealed his fate. His blood type matched blood found at the scene, and his sock print matched one left in the victim's blood. Jens Söring was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. 2 gifted students. 2 wasted lives. A couple bound by obsession, manipulation, and rage, who destroyed not just themselves, but the very people who gave Elizabeth life. The murders of Derek and Nancy Haysom shocked Virginia and the world. Not because strangers killed them in some cult ritual, but because their own daughter orchestrated their deaths, and the man who loved her enough to kill carried out the bloody deed. In 1987, Haysom, then 23 years old, pleaded guilty to 2 counts of accessory to murder before the fact and was sentenced to 90 years in prison, 1 45-year sentence for each murder, to be served consecutively. Söring pleaded not guilty, but was found guilty at his 1990 trial and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms for first-degree murder. Haysom, incarcerated in the Fluvanna Correctional Center for Women in Troy, Virginia, first became eligible for parole in 1995 and submitted a parole request every 3 years thereafter. 14. Haysom's sentence was subject to mandatory parole. She would have been released automatically in 2032, 45 years after her conviction. During an interview in 2016, Haysom said Söring had killed her parents in a rage after learning that her mother had sexually abused her. Söring had contended that Haysom killed her parents on her own over the abuse, albeit she originally denied that any such abuse had occurred. In the same interview, Haysom said she was profoundly ashamed of her role in the murders of her parents and criticized Söring for maintaining his innocence. On November 25, 2019, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam announced that both Haysom and Söring would be released, but not pardoned, and sent back to their respective home countries. After more than 30 years in prison, Haysom was released from prison to the custody of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and then deported to her home country of Canada in January 2020. 1920 Söring was deported to his home country of Germany after his release. U.S. Representative Ben Klein issued a statement condemning her release as a cost-cutting attempt by the state of Virginia, and not based on merit. Adrienne L. Bennett, then chair of the Virginia Parole Board, asserted that the decision to grant Haysom and Söring parole was also justified by their young age at the time the crime was committed. This case remains one of the most disturbing examples of how love, manipulation, and hatred can twist into something lethal. A reminder that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from outsiders. It comes from within the family itself. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Criminology Insights, and hit the bell icon so you never miss our deep dives into true crime's darkest stories.